Then we all got really quiet.
I'm guessing we should wait till like a couple after to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can start at 6. That's when I normally start.
Okay.
We'll have to move the meeting minutes down. Probably.
Do you want me to start with the land acknowledgement, or did you want to pull up the agenda?
I'll pull up the PowerPoint and then that has the land acknowledgement on there.
Okay. And I can start. Yeah, and I can start the land acknowledgement while you do that.
Cool.
So we want to open our Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee with an acknowledgement of the lands we are occupying. Thank you to Tony Inkashola and Thomas Smith and the Shilish Queslispa Cultural Committee and Emily Armstrong for recommending the key language of tonight's acknowledgement. We as members of the housing system in Missoula acknowledge that we are in the homelands of the Salish and Kalispel people. Today, we offer our respect for their history and culture and for their ancient and continuing presence in this landscape, and for the path that they have shown us in caring for this place for the generations to come. We recognize the ways in which the system of government has contributed to the disconnection of Indigenous people and from these lands and their families, culture, and heritage. It is our responsibility as individuals and as a collective to acknowledge the white supremacist culture underlying our practices and to be accountable to the demanding respect for culture or for tribal sovereignty and Indigenous cultures and the needs and perspective of Indigenous peoples. As the committee continues to acknowledge with deep gratitude this land, may we also move towards action to redistribute power and resources to communities directly harmed by historical and current practices of colonization to embrace conversations and behavior that lead to structural changes. Thank you, and we call our meeting of the Affordable Housing Residents Oversight Committee to order.
Great. Zoe, do you want to do a roll call?
Yes. Okay, so we have a couple excused absences tonight from Jerry Stiffarm, Riley Jacobson, Bobby Weston, John Engen, and Christine Liddig. So I'll go through the list of the remainder. If you could just let us know that you're here, I'll mark you present. We have Lori Davidson.
Here.
Heidi West. Don't see Heidi yet. Paul Herendeen.
Here.
Laura Bird. Don't see Laura yet. Katie Carlson.
Here.
Will Seaburn.
Here.
Misty Brown.
Here.
Okay. Got everyone that's currently here. Currently don't have quorum, but once, I believe once Laura gets here, we would have 7. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Zoe.
Yep.
So we'll skip approval of minutes until we see if Laura or Heidi come.
Oh yeah, and Heidi.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, we're gonna keep doing introductions, but I think we're getting close to you all knowing each other. I think you've all been, at least this group has all been at the same meeting, at least once. But we'll just keep doing introductions so you can keep remembering each other's names and roles and how you like to be addressed. So we can start with whoever would like to go first, but we'll ask you to share your name and how you like to be addressed, the pronouns that you use, and your role on the committee. Katie, do you want to start and then maybe call on someone?
Yeah, sure. I'm Katie Carlson, and you can just call me Katie, and it's she, her, and I am the chair and the real estate representative. Paul, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Paul Herendeen, go by Paul, he, his, and I'm here to represent the financial industry. See, Emily, are you included in this roll call?
I think so. I'm Emily Harris Shears. I use she, her pronouns. You can call me Emily. And I am the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Administrator, so I staff the committee. Lori, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Lori Davidson. I'm the Executive Director of the Missoula Housing Authority. You can call me Lori, she, her pronouns. And I'm an ex officio member on the committee. And let's see, Misty?
Hi, my name is Misty and my pronouns are she, her. My role on the committee is I am the nonprofit housing appointee representative. And how about Montana James?
Hi, everyone. I'm Montana James. My pronouns are she, her, and I am here as staff and not a committee member. Thanks.
Well, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I can go. Will Seaburn, community member, he, him, pronouns.
Thanks. And Zoe, do you want to go?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, my name is Zoe Walters. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm an admin with Community Planning and Development.
Hi, Heidi. I saw you're joining. I don't know if you're just joining, so I don't want to get you while you're taking your coat off proverbially, but do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm having issues with the new Office 365. Yeah, Heidi West. I'm the City Council liaison. She, her, hers. Anything else? Did you have a question, a prompt?
No, I didn't. I was thinking I might jazz it up next time with a prompt.
Awesome. All right.
Now that you all know each other. Really get the ice broken, you know. Thanks for introducing yourselves. I think we got everyone.
And do we have a
Looking through,
quorum
yeah.
now?
Yes, Zoe, that's right, correct?
I
You
don't
said
see
yes,
Laura.
but with Heidi, do we have a quorum?
I'm not showing a quorum on eScribe. Let me count
I
again.
guess I'm only counting 6 also.
We would need Laura.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, 6 is a quorum
Oh,
Is
because
that
it's
6 or
one
7?
more, right? It's one more.
I thought it was 7. And I'm
Oh, you're right. Yeah, we need Lauren. Okay. You're right. Sorry, I got mixed up for a second. Okay, well, we'll skip the minutes and we're light on things to vote on tonight, so that's okay. We're heavy on discussion, which is great. Okay. Keep wanting to mute myself, but I'm the next person, so I need to stop doing that. So I just want to refresh us on our norms, and I won't read them all, but just a few key ones to, I think especially tonight, to lean into accepting loose ends. We're going to be starting the conversation about your allocation planning process that we'll be working on in November, and then opening up for a public comment period that then we'll finalize in December. So I think just kind of starting to name that there are going to be some loose ends in your committee work. Not that there aren't already, but just naming that to push yourselves, which I think you all do really well, to be sure to ask if you're unsure about things and just be and stay present. And if you, I tried to do this as much as possible in the landscape assessment, but if we're talking about things, oh my gosh, my dog, sorry. I'm not usually at home. I'm sorry about this. to just spell out acronyms that we're using, and I think we're getting into kind of an acronym heavy space. So just be aware of that. Zoe, do you want to take the next section, please? I'm going to mute.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so for public comment, this meeting is a Zoom webinar, and you can find the agenda and related documents at ci.missoula.mt.us/webcasts. You can participate by calling in from a landline or a cell phone using one of the phone numbers on today's agenda. Once you're in the meeting, you can press *9 to raise your hand to be recognized for public comment, and press *6 to mute and unmute. If you join the meeting from a computer or smartphone, you can use the raise and lower hand function to be recognized for public comment that way. And alternate ways to participate and comment at a later time are through email, mail, or voicemail. And the phone numbers and addresses are displayed on the screen here, and you can also find them on the participation guide where the agenda is located. And I don't have any additional attendees right now.
Thanks. Zoe, if someone was watching from YouTube, would it be likely that they might call?
Like call into the Zoom meeting?
Yeah, from this. No, there's no way to do that. Never mind.
I mean, if someone's watching live, they could, yeah, they could join the meeting. And
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, okay. They can do that at any time, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Mhm.
All right. So I wanted to have a chance to revisit your charter. And without a quorum, you won't vote on it tonight, but maybe we'll get close to it. And I wanted to just revisit the language that you all worked on in the September meeting and that Christine posted into Google. And this is the language that was proposed, which is the Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee is committed to thoughtful leadership that is present, informed, data-driven, community-minded, people-centered, and willing to learn. We'll strive to leverage the yearly allocation plan of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to create more safe, equitable, and accessible housing for all Missoulians in accordance with a place to call home. Innovation and creative thinking from all community members is integral to providing solutions to housing challenges. We'll operate with awareness and self-awareness of our community as it grows and changes. And I did have one comment from Will asking about taking out a section distinctly calling out the responsibility of distributing housing resources throughout the city and the responsibility of all neighborhoods. So I wanted to make sure that that was raised. And then I just wanted to name that I made some like specific changes. Lori, I see your hand. That I made some specific changes, like naming the allocation plan and the trust fund by their name. So just wanted to name those specific changes that I made, but they were really just content changes. Lori?
Yeah, I just had a question about in accordance with a place to call home. Could you remind me which plan a place to call home is?
Yep, that's the adopted housing policy.
Okay. I just wanted to, I was confusing it with another one and I just want to make sure I was thinking correctly. Thank you.
Will?
Yeah, Emily, thanks for bringing up my comment. I had to look at the Google Doc today to see if anyone had responded to it because it'd been so long since I added that comment. And I'm guessing you don't know because Christine did the editing, like why that section was removed. I guess we can't vote on it right now anyway, but maybe, I mean, would it just be best if I like commented in the doc or something and maybe try to tag her or something to see if she had any thoughts on that?
I think what could be good is if you have a specific sentence that you're wanting to see in there, I would put that in there. and then maybe tag that. And it could be the sentence that was removed, or it could be something that you feel is different, or whichever. I think that could be a good way to go about it. And then you're right, I think we will have to revisit this in November, because we can't vote on it tonight, but still wanted to elevate that you have all done the work on it. So, Katie?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't get it in the Google Docs to edit it or anything, but I would agree with what Will said. I think that line about making sure it's equitable through all neighborhoods is important to have in there. But I actually can't quite remember where that was.
So it was probably somewhere in here, this equitable and accessible housing for all Missoulians. It was probably, I'm guessing, I don't remember, but I
Okay.
bet it was something that got edited in here. So maybe Will or Katie, if you want to make a recommendation, that would be really great. And then we can revisit that with the group.
Yeah,
Or it might
I'd be
just
happy.
be as easy as adding in the, it might be a wordsmithing thing too. Heidi?
Sorry, I just had a general comment with having it be in all neighborhoods. My guess is that we'll see a lot of projects that are, like there's a bigger funding source than ours that's probably dictating a lot of things. And I just wanted to maybe point out that a lot of the scoring criteria for federal funds require them to be in qualified census tracts, and so a little bit of this is probably outside of our control, even if we're striving to be equitable and have affordable housing be in all neighborhoods. It's not always something that I think will, as a body, be able to dictate, and so I just want to be sure that we word it in a way where it's a goal, realizing that some of the things might be directed by things outside of our control, if that makes sense. I don't want to promise something we can't deliver, if that makes sense.
Can I respond to that? And then Will, can we get, yeah, Heidi, thank you for saying that. I was thinking about that this morning, actually, about in reviewing the other applications that we have in the innovation round right now, and just thinking about like the simultaneous greatness of the trust fund and its smallness. And that it will often be working in conjunction with so many other funding sources that really we won't be dictating as much as we hope, and that like it is a strategy of the, oh my goodness. We're the most popular house on the block tonight. I bet it's all political candidates, I bet. What was I saying? Oh, that we don't have, what was I saying? Like that we're not always going to, like that we are a named strategy in a place to call home, but we're not, like ultimately the trust fund is not responsible for carrying out everything in a place to call home unilaterally, which I think is a challenging but important distinction, that like we align those things, but we're not responsible for all of it. So I just wanted to name that. And I think we should always be paying attention to it. I think that's why we named the policy in the policy manual about neighborhood engagement and developers having to bring a plan to neighborhoods early in their process and engaging with neighborhoods, and that we want to see, diversity of project types across neighborhoods. But like, I don't know that we'll always be able to say, we're not going to fund you because we'd rather you be across town. Like, I just don't know how realistic that is too. So thank you for saying that. It's been on my mind with this new innovation round. Will?
Yeah, I was just going to add, we actually talked about that last time because I think the language I originally proposed was like ensure equitable distribution, and we kind of talked about that's not really realistic. And that's why I just wish, I actually think we came up with something last time that was really good. Maybe I should go back and look at the recording that kind of just expressed this is like the vision, right? Like this is what we're striving for. And I think then something we're accountable to like inquire about. And then I also think like recognizing our role beyond just the trust fund allocation too, like just something like I think one of our things in the bylaws is like keeping on top of what's happening in the housing market, like we're going to talk about with the landscape assessment today. Like that's another place where we, because there's, you know, that's another place we can be looking into like how well are we doing in terms of where different types of housing is landing across the city. So yeah, but I'm happy to take that. I think we maybe do have a quorum now, but I realize we probably, I don't know if we want to spend a ton of time wordsmithing right now. So I'd be happy to take that as an action item, and I could put it in there and maybe even connect with Christine directly to just see if she's cool with, you know, whatever language I propose, and then we could approve it in November.
Hi, Laura. I didn't see you joined, and I'm glad you're here. Thanks for mentioning that, Will. I'm in the little screen, so I didn't see.
I'm here.
Hi,
I am.
Laura.
I got about a bunch of kids around me, but I am here.
Glad you're here.
Happy to see you.
Happy to see you too. Yeah, I think that, you know, I always encourage if you have a quorum to do your work in the meeting. So if you all want to power through it and come up with a sentence that works for you all, or, you know, rework this, you have the time to do that. So I would say this is your work time to do it, and that people knew that this was on the agenda and you could do it today. Will?
I mean, if we want to go for that, I'm happy to offer a suggestion now. Do you want to? Okay.
Yep.
What if we just put, well, I'd hate to limit the a place to call home. My initial thought was like, you could say with a place to call home, comma, you know, in particular this thing, but I think there's a lot of things about a place to call home. So I don't know if we want to highlight just one thing. So I wonder if it should just be, I think originally it was a separate sentence right after that. Well, I don't think the a place to call thing home was there, but I think it was a separate sentence after that sentence that was, so maybe starting after a place to call home. I think it was something along the line like, you know, the committee, like the committee strives to promote, you know, promote affordable housing across all of Missoula's neighborhoods. That's like an initial stab. I think we can do better than that, but because hopefully that we're striving to, it gets to like, not that we're guaranteeing it's going to happen. But yeah, Katie, I see your hand is up, so go for it.
I think we have the term equitable distribution in there for it across multiple neighborhoods. It was something like that, like equitable distribution across Missoula. But I don't exactly remember what the specific language was.
That sounds right. Equitable distribution.
Is this sentence not getting it? I mean, no, it doesn't say distribution, but I'm wondering if like the intent is there for you.
I wonder if I could say equitable access and distribution of housing for all Missoulians.
Yeah, I mean, I think the meaning could be read in there, but you know, I think maybe to Will's point is like we're trying to make a specific point about that, especially regarding the way some of this stuff tends to get done, and a personal bugbear, but equitable access always puts my hair up a little bit. yeah, everybody's free to purchase any home they want in Missoula. You know, there's no redlining. It's just a question of whether or not they can actually afford to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that might have been what Christine was trying to do there to like condense everything, Emily. But I do agree. I think the sentiment we're talking about is that line in Place to Call Home that like no neighborhood should be exempt, nor should any neighborhood be asked to change dramatically. So some form of like, equitable distribution of affordable housing across Missoula's neighborhoods is sort of the sentiment that I think is important to include.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's basically it. And then, I think strive is the kind of solves our problem about promising more than we can maybe deliver.
I think I lost the thread, so you'll have to tell me if I found it.
Across, yeah, you're on it. Across Missoula's neighborhoods, something like, I think we can at least start with that and then see how we like it.
Showing you all my tricks. We can change that later, but can't handle having strive and strive in 2 sentences in a row. Well,
Yeah, I'm just curious for people's thoughts on, I think because we're saying equitable distribution of housing, I think that implies that, we're talking about like affordable housing and things like that. But I'm curious if people think we should have a qualifier in there. I actually kind of like it the way it is because I think you could argue too, like, well, it's not just a distribution of affordable housing, like we want good distribution of, market rate housing and multifamily, single family, like everything, as it makes sense for each neighborhood. But just curious what other people think.
The way it is now works for me personally.
Yeah. I feel, are you saying, should we add something around housing type?
I meant like you actually using the word affordable,
Oh,
but I think I'm arguing against my own point. Like I think I like how it's written here. I think it's really well covered by saying it's an equitable distribution of housing. So.
all right. Anything else? What else do you want to raise? Well,
Yeah, I didn't even notice this the first time, but just seeing how it says community, it's like all commas, 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 and then community minded in parentheses, people centered. Like I'm fine if we have both community minded and people centered, but probably should just read more like the rest of the list. Or I think you could just for brevity's sake, I think we could say that those are close enough to the same thing that we could delete one of them.
do you want to, does anyone want to pick one?
I'd advocate for community minded.
I like the community minded better as well.
Anybody else? The fingers on delete.
Do you need equitable in both sentences?
Want to take it out here, Lori? Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't know. To create more safe and accessible housing, the committee strives to promote equitable distribution of housing across. What would be the difference? What are we talking about in the first sentence as opposed to the second sentence when we say, I mean, in the second sentence, obviously it's equitable distribution. What is the equitable referring to in the first sentence?
Could
Will, are
we
you hoping to answer that?
replace equitable in that instance with affordable? Safe, affordable, and accessible housing.
How does that work for the group?
Yeah, that works for me. I think, Lori, yeah, there's something, I think, if we're getting into the weeds, I think the grammar of equitable housing doesn't quite line up. Like I couldn't explain that any better than that, but something about that doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, equitable housing.
Right.
This is Laura Bird. For me, equitable in that sentence means that we're going to provide housing in a fair manner. We're going to, we're not going to be biased. We're going to show that we're not. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Maybe I should turn my camera on. That's just my opinion. I'm sorry, I haven't had much input, but I've been listening. Let's see. But for me, equitable in that sentence is, I like it, but affordable is different than equitable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's very different than equitable, but I just wasn't sure. And when you define it, Laura, it makes a lot more sense to me, but I'm not sure unless we define it more that people will get the meaning, what our intention is.
Or safe, equitable, because accessible kind of goes in line with equitable, right? Okay.
It could. I mean, accessible also has two meanings.
It is sorry.
I think you're right, though. It does make more sense in that second part than it does in the first. Okay. Stop. Sorry, my kids are distracting me.
Laura, I think that's a really good point. And I wonder, like Emily or people who work for the housing department now, do we still talk about fair housing assessment and all that? I would think fair is the right word to put in there to get at because I think that's very much what you talk about when you're looking at issues of equity in housing is you do your fair housing assessment and things like that. So what about is that a good word to try to include in there? So it's safe, affordable, fair, and accessible housing.
I think that's the right word. I'm wondering if it's in the scope of your work as a committee. I think it is, but I also am thinking about your vision being a high level statement and not needing to be fully in the weeds of everything you're going to do. So I'm just wondering, I'm offering that as a reminder.
Yeah, I just actually had the same thought that I feel like this is almost too far in the weeds. I feel like any project or, potential thing that would get funded should have already been evaluated for, that it's compliant with fair housing before it gets to us. So I don't know if I think we don't necessarily have to evaluate that on a project, we're not that specific, I would say. I don't know. I also had a question about the term accessible. I think for me, I'm interpreting it as like broadly, you know, something that people can enter into or attain. But I was curious if we're also interpreting it as like accessibility, like ADA, you know, in the ADA context for like accessibility or, you know, around people that have mobility challenges. I was just a little like, I think that could be definitely interpreted in two ways, and that's not necessarily bad, and it can mean both things in this sentence. I was just curious if we want to leave it, you know, I guess if we're okay with that.
Katie?
As far as the accessible, would you rather have it say attainable, so it's more clear that it's not talking about like ADA versus, you know, affordability? Attainability is really talking about, can somebody afford it? I mean, I'm fine either way. I was just wondering if that would, Heidi, what your concern about.
Well, and I'm okay with it meaning both things, and leaving it accessible, because I think, you know, we have a severe shortage of accessible homes in our community as well, and that's something I think, you know, we need. I guess I'm just making sure that we're all okay with it potentially meaning both things.
Does anybody have any thoughts on switching it from accessible to attainable?
I noticed in the landscape assessment that it seems like we use in that document, it's like the term is affordable and attainable housing. I don't know if that's intentional or not. I assume that it probably is, but I mean, I'd be fine with saying affordable and attainable housing. You could even argue, I mean, I don't want to create another thread to think about, but you could even argue it could just be attainable housing. But I think I saw affordable and attainable used a lot in the landscape assessment doc, so maybe that's what we go with.
I mean, to simplify, we could take out affordable, accessible, and just put attainable housing. So make it create more safe and attainable housing.
I'd vote for that.
Okay.
Is that what the group wants to do?
Let's do it.
I like it.
Okay. Anything else?
On the last line, I'm just wondering if we just say, like, I don't know if we need awareness and self-awareness, if we just say we will operate with awareness of our community as it grows and changes.
My very thought.
Can you say it again?
Yeah, sorry. Basically just deleting and self-awareness. So it would read, we will operate with awareness of our community as it grows and changes.
Cool. Okay. Okay. So your new proposed vision for your charter, do you need me to read it so you can hear it? Or do you just want to read it to yourselves? How's your learning style? I'm going to let you read it. That's not great for YouTube or Zoom, so I'm going to read it also. Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee is committed to thoughtful leadership that is present, informed, data-driven, community-minded, and willing to learn. Will endeavor to leverage the yearly allocation plan of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to create more safe and attainable housing for all Missoulians in accordance with a place to call home. The committee strives to promote equitable distribution of housing across Missoula's neighborhoods. Innovation and creative thinking from all community members is integral to providing solutions to housing challenges. We will operate with awareness of our community as it grows and changes. How's that sound? Any last changes? All right. So I'm going to take this, put it in your charter in real time. Do I have it open? Yep. Can you see it? No. Oh, shoot. No, I'm not. I can't figure out my two screens at home. Sorry. I'm going to send it out to you later, but that was the only piece of your charter that you needed to change tonight. So are you ready to vote on it? Or do you want to see your whole charter before you vote? It's the charter that was attached. So this will just be the new vision. So if you're ready, you just need someone to make a motion.
I move we approve the charter. Say it right.
That's good.
Is there a second?
I can second.
Great. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of passing the motion to approve the charter, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. And the motion carries.
Cool. Congratulations. You have
Yay.
a charter. So I'll do some back end work on putting it all together for you, and then I'll send it out for your group. Congratulations. And thank you. That was, I know, a lot of work over the last maybe 3 months. And I really appreciate the work that you've done and some really great discussions, I think, that helped just you all, in my perspective as an outsider of the committee, really kind of develop together and learn about each other and your values and what you're bringing. And so I really appreciate you participating in that. Thanks. Okay, so next we're going to move on to going over the landscape assessment. And I sent that out in advance. And I'm just going to do a really high level kind of highlight of what I think is some interesting data from it, and then give you opportunity for discussion and time for discussion. So I just wanted to just highlight kind of some of the key spaces of the landscape assessment, and just a reminder, the purpose of the landscape assessment is to provide relevant data and population snapshots specific to Missoula and the area to help inform your allocation planning process that we'll talk a little bit about tonight, but really will start in earnest in November. And the population data is from the US Census, and just I highlighted in the landscape assessment, but there is in some of the data, a high level of, oh gosh, I just lost it. Error. So what we're really looking for are trends, and not necessarily like drilling down into percentages necessarily. And then also a lot of the community level data and context came from partners who were really gracious to engage with me and have long and meaningful conversations with me. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank the Human Resource Council, Missoula Organization of Realtors, Missoula Housing Authority, Missoula County Public Schools, Reaching Home, and the Missoula Coordinated Entry System, and Sterling CRE Advisors, who all really contributed so much value to this landscape assessment. And Lori, I think I learned about HUD's approval of your authorization for the market rate adjustment before maybe others. I felt like I was really in the know. But Jim said I could put it in the report. So just wanted to, so we're both sharing high level data as well as some updates and outcome data from our programs in community development and planning and innovation. And so I wanted to just share some highlights of the Place to Call Home implementation. And as you know, we really organized a housing plan into 4 key areas: track and analyze progress for continuous improvement, align and leverage existing funding resources to support housing, reduce barriers to new supply and promote access to affordable homes, and partner to create and preserve affordable homes. And I won't spend too much time on these, but we've achieved some kind of outcome and goal progress in every area to date, more in others, but just to highlight that in align and leveraging existing funding resources, one of the named strategies was to adopt the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which we obviously have done, and a lot of progress has been made in that area, including our first funding round. And the adoption and creation of this committee, and partnering to create and preserve affordable homes. We're utilizing the land banking strategy. We're brokering partnerships to create and preserve permanently affordable condos and other homes. And then also in reducing barriers to new supply. There have been a lot of great successes there, including adopting the ADU code recommendations, finalizing the townhome exemption development and subdivision review. And then the most recent is securing the funding for the comprehensive code reform, which will be a project in this fiscal year. So there's a lot going on that really aligns with our goals in the housing policy, and excited to continue to share progress as we make it. Then also in our federal programming, I wanted to highlight the total investment from program year 2020, which is $1.6 million, which was a combination of the Community Development Block Grant, the home investment, and then the Community Development Block Grant, COVID or the CARES Act dollars. And I just highlighted in a different way than in the landscape assessment the impact that has been made through those programs, which really kind of breaks down to who's being supported and how. 34 families are housed and supported, 25 existing homes were preserved, 1,100 individuals benefited from financial and renter education and counseling. 790 individuals were provided emergency shelter due to COVID-19, and 2,200 individuals experiencing houselessness were provided a sanitary environment. And those are just highlights. I'm not going to read them all, but I think it's really important to highlight the incredible work that's done with federal investments and local partnerships, and that will continue to be done and also leveraged with the work of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in future years. So we're excited to be partners in that as well. Then and this is not in the order of the actual landscape assessment, and I think it looks personally much better in the landscape assessment. Oh, I'm going to put you back in full screen. Sorry about that. But I just wanted to kind of explain how we organize things and why we pulled the data that we did. So we focused on housing need and experience for population characteristics based on things that impact people's housing need or housing experience. So we really focused on types of units that are currently occupied, so people who are owners and renters, and then also vacancies and units that are occupied. I think that helps tell a little bit of the need and the story. I'm not going to go through all of the data. I think you've had a chance to do that, but if there are questions, you can totally raise your hand and we can have a discussion about that as well. Then we also I wanted to highlight income, which of course impacts people's access to housing. I think, Paul, you've done a really great job even tonight elevating that, but throughout our conversations. And as you can see, the comparison of median household income, both in the US and Montana as a state, and then in Missoula, and how Missoula fares in that. And then also in the 2019 distribution of income, households by income bracket, we see kind of that inverse bell curve for larger groups at a lower and higher income distribution. And so just something to note in the impact of how people are experiencing their income experience, and then also, ultimately their housing experience, which we see later. And then also highlighted our race and ethnicity in Missoula and distribution of that, which we disaggregate some of the renter and cost burden and houselessness experiences by later. So really provided this as a framework point and a reference point. And then I want to elevate housing affordability and cost burden. This is something that the committee raises, I think has raised in almost every meeting that we've had since we started meeting in June. And I want to highlight the different ways that we look at it in the data. And, we looked at it by the type of housing experience, whether you're a renter or a homeowner. And then we also disaggregated cost burden by race and ethnicity. And as was highlighted in the assessment, we find that nearly 8,000 households earning less than $50,000 per year are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. And this income level is very close to the 80% AMI level for a household of 3, which is $54,100. And the experience for owners looks very different. While there are cost burden owners, there are more owners earning above $75,000 per year than the other income categories combined, and a significant 45% of homeowners earning below $75,000 a year are cost burdened. So just wanted to name those kind of stark differences and the needs in each kind of experience of type of living. And then I want to further highlight that Missoulians who identify their ethnicity as Hispanic or their race as Black and African American are 2 groups who are most likely to experience cost burden in their housing. 52% of people who identify as Hispanic pay more than 30% toward housing costs, and 46% of people who identify as Black or African American pay more than 30% toward their housing. And this contrasts with the 36% of white households that pay more than 30% toward their housing costs. Then we highlighted some of the rental trends. And since the first quarter in 2019, the rental vacancy rate has continued to decline well below the what's kind of accepted as a healthy market, which is 5% vacancy rate for a market. I already said that. And in the second quarter of 2021, the rental vacancy rate was estimated to be at 0.38%. And in addition to the shrinking supply, the cost of available units is rising. So it's just making access much tighter for people. And this is just a note that this is really for multifamily housing, which is categorized as 5 units or more. And then I included the area median income chart for affordable monthly rent at 30% of your income. If you're paying 30% of your income toward housing, this would be your affordable rent. And I included the 100% AMI and just wanted to note the reason I did that is to support the conversations that you all are having around exploring potentially the recommendation of increasing that to 100% AMI, and just wanted to name that. That currently the housing policy supports projects up to 80% area median income, and so do the federal programs that we receive funding for. But I know that that's a conversation that you all are having, and I wanted to just include that. Paul?
I'll just make the quick point too, that when talking about this, it's not a binary state, so it's not like if you're paying 29% of your income for housing, you're in great shape necessarily.
Yeah.
So just something, when you see these numbers, something to keep in mind.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I thought about that when I was looking at the average rent chart too, and looking at the, oh my gosh, the like these are averages. We know that that means people are above and below that, and I also like, and then looking at this and thinking like people are definitely squeezed, at either side of these. And I was just thinking about that, like sometimes I think in my work personally, a 30% gives me a false sense of security. Like that people are okay if they're under this, but it's not always true. So it's helpful to know, like you're right, if someone's at 28% of their income toward their housing, like they might still feel burdened if there are other factors in their housing, or if their utilities aren't included, or if there are other things that are going on. So it's a good point. Thanks. So I'm just going to scan through some of the homeownership trends. I know that you all have the report, but I wanted to just make sure we covered some of this before the discussion, just depending on what level you were able to engage with it before the meeting. So in homeownership trends, we also see that the opportunity is just increasingly out of reach for households with lower incomes. And looking through data, it becomes clear that homeownership really feels reserved for households that are earning above $75,000 a year in a combined income. And it's highlighted in the affordable prices and the home sales data for the last 3 years, where you see the supply of homes under $300,000 is shrinking. And I just thought that was really interesting as I just was making chart after chart and like looking at it in so many different ways. And it just felt really staggering to me to keep seeing it played out in this way. And not that we don't know it, but just to have access to this data and to keep seeing it, I just had a real appreciation for more making it so publicly available so that we can interact with it in this way. And you also see it in the year-over-year change, which I think just shows the great change from, what people have been experiencing and articulating over 2019 and 2020, and seeing that change in the illustration. And then in landscape, we specifically name the experience of people who are experiencing houselessness in Missoula as well as a specific population to know and learn about. And I wanted to just highlight, I know I named this in the landscape assessment, but we use 2 sources of data, different points of data for this. And we use the Missoula Coordinated Entry System, and we also use the Missoula County Public Schools. And the reason for that is that they use 2 different definitions of homelessness. And so it's important to have both experiences captured in this landscape. And so this is Missoula Coordinated Entry System data, the number of unique individuals identified in Missoula Coordinated Entry System. I named in the landscape that the change in the numbers doesn't necessarily mean a decrease in the number of people experiencing houselessness. But the explanation from 2020 is really that they saw a decline in people accessing services because of COVID, and that they anticipate serving more people as of September 2021 than they did in all of 2020. So just wanted to name that they are seeing a trend in the increase of people experiencing houselessness. I also wanted to name specifically the disproportionality of people experiencing houselessness, in Missoula by race, and just name that. Well, we named earlier that 91% of people in Missoula identify as white. In the Missoula Coordinated Entry System, 78% of people identify as white, and 16% of people identify as American Indian or Alaska Native, which just highlights the disparity and the disproportionality of that experience. And in my mind, an opportunity to explore that further and to also think about, is there potential for resource allocation, which I name in the conclusion as well. And then also for students experiencing houselessness, the number of students who are houseless or at risk in Missoula County Public Schools has risen in the last 2 years. And the liaison in the district named COVID-19 as one of the primary factors. And she also named other factors, but didn't go into those. So COVID-19 was really the primary factor that was named. And then in what felt like to me a burst of good news in the landscape assessment, I wanted to highlight some of the housing development activity. So we've seen increases in units permitted since 2018, which signals increased capacity coming on board at some point in the future, though we have to continue to meet residual and growing demand. So it doesn't mean that we need to slow down development by any means, in my opinion, but it is hopeful to see an increase in the units permitted. And then also just highlighting the distribution.
Emily, I have a quick question about that last slide. On the multifamily bar, that like 655 is, I assume that both Trinity and Villaggio, so like about half of that is Trinity and Villaggio, right?
Yeah, I think so. Montana, you can correct me, please, but that's what I think too.
Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, that's a great point. So those are also affordable projects as well. And then just a distribution of where new building permits are in the city. And we see, the larger projects sort of at out of the heart of the city or the downtown area, but exciting to see that there's a good distribution of projects overall, and something that we are able to continue to keep an eye on too. So I just want to highlight conclusions that our trends elevate absolutely a dire need for responses related to rental housing, homeownership, and houselessness to increase production of homes, especially available to residents, making up to 120% AMI for homeownership, really targeted probably around 60% AMI for rental, and then the need for inventory at all levels of the market, but then also evidence supporting targeted strategies for populations who are experiencing unique housing circumstances in the market, which includes people with extremely low incomes, households facing cost burden, and American Indian or Alaska Native people who are unhoused. And then there's opportunities to leverage other funding sources in partnership with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund as well. So thanks for sitting through that. I just wanted to make sure everyone was kind of on the same page to have some discussion and share feedback and whatever else you would like to do. But I wrote some short prompts to start the discussion if you feel you need those, but I want to open up the conversation for discussion. So what resonated with you in the landscape assessment? I saw Katie and then Will.
It's kind of depressing. I guess the hopeful part is just seeing how many things are in development. Not that that helps us right now, but then there's hope that like in a year or two, things might look drastically different, but it seems so bleak at the moment.
Will?
I actually just had it was a question actually. There was that slide about homeownership and like the upper income bucket being the 75,000. And I'm just wondering, is that like because that's how the American Community Survey does it? Because my guess is if you looked at like 75 to 100,000, like it's not like there's a bunch of people in that range who probably are making up who's not cost burden. But I'm just curious, is that like how the ACS data set, or sorry, American Community Survey like presents the data? Those are the income buckets to work with.
That's a good question. I have to look back. I don't remember if I lumped it or if they lumped it after 75. So I'll look and I'll get back to you. I've been very into the data, so I'll look at it and get back to you later this week.
Yeah, and just to maybe a quick follow up on that, you know, it would be a lot of work to get into, but I think there's certainly a time component to that as well, right? I mean, it's not just income, it's when you bought the house. So $75,000 a year and you bought 15 years ago, you know, could be all right.
Right. Yeah, and I don't know that we have the capacity to get that from the data sources we have, Paul. We have ACS data at our disposal, but I think it's a good point.
I don't think we learned anything. I mean, it's maybe just as a reaction to this whole thing. I think the problem is well documented and clear, you know, and we can dive into that. And there's certainly good things to be learned in there about the most vulnerable populations and you know who especially needs help. But the overall parameters, I think we got a good handle on. And you know, so I guess something I'm interested in is a sense of what it's really going to take to do anything about it. Difficult question to answer, not exactly part of the scope of this document.
Yeah.
I was also wondering if it was possible to dig down a little bit more into, you know, households with kids under 5. I know we have the house, you know, the demographics of like people with this many people in their household can rent this, but I feel like childcare costs are so burdensome for families. It would be if we could pull out information about, you know, the percentage of families that are cost burdened that also have children under 5. I think that would provide some really meaningful, like a meaningful category. Yeah.
Let me see how the overlays work. That's the limitation, is like, does ACS allow the overlay? And if it does, then I will look into it. Thanks for that recommendation. Will?
Yeah, I was just curious, and Paul, you might have some insights into this, but I remember when I worked in Milwaukee, our Fair Housing Council there did the analysis around the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data. Basically, like there's certain data, I'm not an expert on it, but certain data that has to be reported to the federal government from lenders. It's very much a lagging indicator, like similar to the ACS. Like I think you have to wait like 2 years before you can even start to see the data. So it's always like 2 years old. But as I recall, I think it might even address Heidi's question, but I also think it might address kind of, Paul, you made the point, well, if you were earning 75,000 when you bought the home 15 years ago, not that big of a deal. I think you get that type of data when you're with the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. But Paul, I don't know, or Katie, if you guys have any experience working with that, or is there anyone in, like, I think that we had like a nonprofit in town there that's like their job every year was to analyze this data. Like, is there someone who's looking at that already now in Missoula?
Yeah, I don't know if there is somebody doing that. The times I've dug into that for various things, I remember that they collected a lot of racial and ethnic data. I don't know if they would have anything there about the number of children, under a certain age or anything like that. And there wouldn't be a direct line to that question of cost burden necessarily. You might be able to pull in, you could probably pull income and then, appraisal value out of that. I think you'd be able to get at that in different ways. I mean, even just looking at the analysis that was included in here, you can get some sense of, okay, $75,000, what's 30% of that, monthly, what, at a 3% rate. Like, you can pretty quickly get to what an affordable house is. And I think that would probably tell the story. So I guess I'm waffling a bit. There might be something there, but it probably would take some work to get into, my experience.
I sort of wonder if more could pull, because we have the historical data, if they could pull the numbers of how often houses are turning over. Because, generally people sell every 5 years, but if housing prices are going up so much they can't buy somewhere else, are people historically now holding on to houses for longer so that, what they bought at, 5 years ago was a stretch, but now it's comfortable, and so they're less cost burden. But I could talk to somebody at Moore and see if they could pull some of those turnover numbers.
I mean, I suppose I do want to raise the question is, what do we gain by adding more detail to an assessment of how bad the current crisis is? And I'm not saying that's necessarily nothing. I mean, there may be something to learn there. There may be trends or, that identify groups that especially need help, may help us target aid. But on the other hand, it's sort of like, well, we know housing is really expensive and it's getting worse, and continuing to just define that, I'm not sure where we're going to get with it.
I guess I have a random comment. I guess part of this, I'm thinking about this not just as us being the only audience for it. And so I think, for example, having really good data on, households with kids under 5, for example, that could be a tool. Like, this document could be a tool that is used in a different venue to affect change, if that makes sense. Because then, whether it's on the state level or, somewhere outside of the sphere of control, you could still use it, to make an argument of like why we should have universal pre-K or, something. Because if we can take that cost away from families, then we can support, like, hey, it has this amazing effect because all of a sudden, you're not as cost burdened and you can afford to live, maybe more comfortably in a place like Missoula. So I think some data sets would be useful, even if, some details useful, even if it isn't necessarily actionable by this body, if that makes sense. And then I just was thinking that chart you had, Emily, about the increase of housing costs over time. I think it would be really useful to have income, like a line for income on that as well, because I think one of the, it's kind of a, a check, because like in some ways that line is like at a pretty, straight trajectory, but if income isn't keeping pace. You know, that gap is getting bigger and you can't really see it without having that other line on there.
I have that.
Did you? I was looking at it. And
No,
I couldn't-
not in the report.
Oh,
I
okay.
made that chart like 9 ways. And I
Oh,
have
nice.
that.
Perfect. I just think, yeah, I think that would illustrate the severity of it, because I was actually looking at some of those lines. I'm like, well, those are trending pretty straight, you know.
Yeah. It's pretty like meh, meh. That's why I
Yeah.
didn't include it. I was like, no, it feels kind of obvious. But it's a good point that like you have to draw the conclusions from other pages. So I can definitely add that. And it was just a lot on the chart. That's why I didn't do it ultimately, because I was like, this is a lot of trend lines. That's good feedback. Glad to hear that. So, Will.
Yeah, sorry. I was just gonna add one thing that stood out to me in the housing affordability slide that showed like 2014, 2018, 2019 is the percentage of people actually decreased from 2014 to 19 who were cost burdened. Not by significant percentages, like I think it was like 4 to 6%, but just curious like why that would be when it does seem like the issue's only gotten worse year over year. Like, does that just mean like people who were cost burdened before figured out they couldn't live here anymore and so they had to move elsewhere? Lori, I see your hands up. I don't know if you have insights on.
I was just going to say that the information lags because of the way it's collected. And if you were going to make that chart now, based on what we know from 2020 and 2021, you'd see a big difference there. It'd probably be way above the 2014 levels and certainly above the 2019 levels. It's just the way the data is collected. I think that it lags.
Well, we did.
Yeah, I guess my question would be more so like the 2019 data though was solid, and like, you know, even between 2014 and 19, like housing prices were going up then. So why would it be that the cost burden actually decreased? The percentage of renters and homeowners who were cost burden actually decreased. I do agree with you. My guess would be it's not going to look as good. Or, I mean, it doesn't look good right now, but it's going to probably be an upward trajectory. Sorry, Heidi, go ahead.
I was going to say we also had an income bump that probably, you know, is reflected in that a little bit. I just remember our HUD, like when I was approving home buyers for, like there was one year, you know, it usually goes up a little bit, but there was one year where there was a kind of a significant jump, I thought, from, you know, what 80% was one year and what 80% was the next year. So I think I would say that maybe we see a little bit of that income bump, but of course, like the housing prices have, like it didn't last. Like that bump didn't effectively do anything for anyone over the long term, but I think we could be seeing that a little bit, so.
Montana.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I just wanted to offer kind of hearing these reflections on those year over year changes and trying to sort out what's significant and what's the cause. And, you know, when in the housing policy, we talk about the value of doing this annual look of every year, looking at these same indicators and using them to guide our conversations, but also very much recognizing that based on the data that we have available, that it's not realistic that we'll be able to parse really valuable long-term trends on an annual basis. So we do talk about the need to do a 5-year report to dig in and to kind of more into some of those details and understand the longer term trends, because I think as a lot of folks have pointed out, the
the shifts in the annual data can seem meaningful sometimes and they're not, or they might be explained by an anomaly. So it can be really hard to maybe to Paul's earlier point, to really get a ton out of the annual look. And it might be a matter of really relying on that 5-year look and using the annual report for the allocation plan purposes, but I don't think it'll answer all of the questions.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think it's also just really something that I was struggling with in writing it, is that it is the baseline year of the report. And while it's not the baseline year of people's experiences or the data's existence or the trends or any of those things, it is the baseline year of this report. And so it's helpful to hear what you like to see or what wasn't helpful, and what you think will help in your allocation planning process. As that is ultimately the purpose of this document, is to help inform and help guide your allocation process so that you feel like you're going in with the data that you feel you need. And I think it's great and fantastic if there's other audiences and avenues that we can share with as well. But I just want to maybe turn us a little bit to that question of like, how do you feel it will help in your allocation planning process? Or did you feel it highlighted needs for you, or what came up for you around the next kind of body of work you're going to do and how you might use this assessment? Is this a helpful tool? Is this a helpful document? What could make it more helpful? Will?
I was going to say that, like, it said, 24% of homeowners are cost burdened, 48% of renters are cost burdened. And then you couple that with the average rent is like $1,100, and I don't know what the average mortgage payment is, but my guess is it's more than $1,100. And even just like, as I think about like allocation of resources, I guess I tip in terms of where we can actually be impactful, kind of tip a little bit more toward rental, just because the amount of money you would actually need to like help get homeowners there versus like that same money that if you're talking about closing the gap from maybe they can, afford 700 and you need to get to 1,100, like that's a $400 gap. Like I think there's more thought that needs to go into that, but that's kind of like my initial thought is, and it's like a question I think we were all asked in the interviews to be on the committee too, was like, how would you determine priorities? And, and then I guess I've used some of the stuff that you mentioned, like we didn't talk in depth on it, but some of the stuff you mentioned around like townhome exemption and updating the code, those are maybe the solutions that can be better focused on helping to make sure more, single family homes and condos are getting built and things like that.
Thanks, Will. Paul?
I feel like I should walk my comments back a little bit and say that this was incredibly useful and very nicely put together. And this kind of data I know is hard to come by and is very critical to supporting the conclusion that housing is expensive or something like that. So I really appreciate it, and it is super useful. And my frustration with the situation does not reflect on the quality of the work done. So
I didn't take it that way. I'm a big proponent of making decisions with the data you have. So I took it in that spirit. Thanks, Paul. Will?
Yeah, thank you. The only other thought I had is like, obviously the data shows that underrepresented groups are overrepresented in cost burden categories and houselessness. And I feel like there's, I feel like that's covered in our, administrative policies and things like that. But like, how can we find grantees who are specifically trying to address those issues? How can we like almost like, I don't know who's applied right now, but like, do we need to do some work to help find partners who can help us address that, like encourage them to apply, things like that.
Heidi?
I had a question around a similar thing, more as in more of like a can we, just because of fair housing rules that Lori or anybody working in housing has to comply with, and what we can and can't discriminate on. And this is probably like a conversation for like a future meeting, but it would be really interesting to have like some guidance around what we are legally allowed to do to get to those disparities, because they obviously exist, but then I'm not sure how we can act on them and stay within like being legal. And that would be useful to know.
You can target housing to groups that are underrepresented or historically excluded, and that if your data shows there's disparities or disproportionalities, you can target services and resources to communities, and as long as you do that in a fair and consistent way, you can do that under fair housing. So it can definitely be something that we can talk more about. And Lori, I know you would provide great guidance on that as well, but it can absolutely be something we can explore more and talk about, but it's not a limitation of the trust fund. Paul?
Just a question. I'm curious, has anybody done an analysis to see how tightly that's correlated with income? If you adjust for income, is there a racial or ethnic gap in these statistics, or is it just that those groups are disproportionately represented in lower income brackets?
Yeah, I didn't have time to do one, but I think I can. I think part of why I didn't do it is because the sources of the data are different, and so I wasn't sure if I would be getting the right conclusion. Like I think like the cost burden data comes from the consolidated HUD data, and then the other data comes from American Community Survey data.
Mhm.
It's all ACS data, but like it gets spliced differently. So long answer for a short question is I didn't have time. But I think it is something to do more exploration and analysis on. I think personally, my perspective is either way, it's still an area to respond to.
So do you think in the interest of time, we need to move on to the innovation round funding update?
Yeah, so I got some, that's really short, so I think we're okay.
Okay.
But I got some good next steps. I will look into some of those follow-up data pieces, and then I will add that extra chart that I already have. And then I waited to distribute this internally or to others, but now that you've all seen it and it's been posted on the city's website, we'll start distributing it more broadly too. And thanks for your feedback, and thanks for the discussion, and just generally for engaging with it. So I just want to give a quick innovation funding round update. It may not be very satisfying. We haven't made funding decisions yet, but just wanted to let you know we're in the process. The funding round is closed. We received 3 applications that totaled $445,000, $445,250 for the total of $300,000 allocation. And we have I have more details on the scoring committee, which I know has been interest of this committee. So I wanted to just share with you. The scoring committee is finalized. We're actually meeting on Friday to make our recommendations. And it includes 8 city staff. It includes the council members' participation and members with broad perspectives from community planning, development, and innovation. And that includes someone from historic preservation, someone from code compliance, and then grants administrators, me, Montana, and other people on our teams. So I just wanted to share that a little bit more, let you know we're in process, and I expect that by November's meeting, it will have gone to committee with council, so things will be public and I can share who applied and where we are with our recommendations and all of those pieces. But just wanted to let you know what's going on, and that's that. And from the learning perspective, we've learned some great things about the application for the next time. So, which is one of the things that we were hoping to achieve. So it's been really good. Like one little funny one is we called the application the narrative, but only on the checklist. Nowhere else on the application did we call it that. So it's just like good things to learn for the next round. Like everyone, just one applicant was like, what's the narrative? It's on this checklist, but what is that? And I was like, oh, that's the application. And they're like, can you change that name? Because why did you do that? So it's just good things, like great to get the little wrinkles ironed out now. So any questions on that? Okay, cool. So if you can believe it, we are in month 5 of the committee, which is just amazing and surprising to me. So I just wanted to share, this is the visual I shared in the first meeting of kind of what was ahead for us and where we were going. And I wanted to just share, I didn't change this at all, but just wanted to share what we've accomplished. So we've really stayed on track. Congratulations and thank you. We've really hit all of our milestones so far. With the exception of the chair and co-chair. I think we moved that maybe to August, but that's okay. That was good to take our time. But we really we've met all of our goals and milestones, and now we're moving into the end of our first 6 months together and moving into the allocation plan. So I just wanted to have a chance to do some reflection with you all. I know that we're a smaller group, but I think that's okay. We can start to do some reflection about what you want the next 6 months or maybe even the full year to look like. Because we asked you, oh, nope, I'm ahead of myself. So really right now we're just kind of preparing for the allocation plan, which is we're gonna start in November. And I need to do some prep work in the time between our next meeting, between now and our next meeting, to make sure that it's a process that works for you all and meets your needs. And so I wanted to just open some time for us to have a discussion about what you need and what you're envisioning so that that planning time meets your goals. So just a reminder that the allocation plan sets the high-level funding priorities for the upcoming award cycle and allocation year. And it's also your opportunity to identify the reserve balance. So coming into the allocation plan in November, I'll have a more clear budget for you of what's available to allocate an award right now, what's currently available, and kind of then you'll make some decisions about how you want to disperse that and allocate that. And I'm just thinking about the allocation plan. I know we've talked about it a lot as really kind of like a high level document or tool to set the priorities for the year and to help kind of give guidance to the staff when we're doing the funding round and all those pieces of what the committee's values and vision are for the funding. And so in the allocation planning in November, I see us kind of spending time thinking about the vision, the process, and the product. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit today of like, when you hear allocation plan, what do you think of? What does it seem like to you? And I want to see, are you all aligned in what we're thinking? And are you aligned with what I'm thinking? And then what's the process you want to take in November? Do you want to spend the majority of the meeting doing your allocation plan, or do we want to do prep work ahead of time? Like what works best for you? And then what's the product? Do you want another report? Do you want a PowerPoint? Do you want something else that I can't think of that you want to recommend? And so I wanted to just open up the time now to talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to stop and open it up. Heidi?
So I think it would be really useful to, I guess, have a little bit of a more context of like if this is going to be part of like the uniform application process for all of the other funding sources that the city deals with or distributes, because I think unless you've been involved with that process, it's a black box. And so I think I think that is important for everyone on the committee to understand, like to envision how this funding gets distributed, if that makes sense.
Heidi, I need a little more.
I guess like in the context, if I'm thinking of how
Is Heidi frozen
going
for
to
others?
be
Or is this me?
allocating resources to projects, I guess. My internet, hold on. My internet connection's unstable, so I'll try without video. I guess what I mean is, if someone's asking for funding, are they asking for funding from like home, community development block grant, and the trust fund all at the same time?
The unified application will be at the same time, but the applicant doesn't necessarily have to apply for all three of the funding sources.
Right, but I think like the context of how people apply for funding would be important for I guess for me to understand, because I think it does give context to like what the potential allocations could be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we've got a stand-up one.
Okay.
It's kind of narrow. It's in our
Okay, let me try. And I'm sorry, I'm feeling so dense about this. I'm so sorry.
Me too. I'm not doing a good job explaining it.
So the unified application will be home, CDBG, and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in one unified application round all at the same time. And applicants can select to apply for multiple funding rounds, but each funding source will still meet its own primary objectives. So like if it's home, they still have to meet home regulations and home objectives and alignment to the consolidated plan and all of those other pieces. And if they're applying to Affordable Housing Trust Fund, they have to align to the guidelines and to the policy manual and to a place to call home and all, our overlying documents. Does that make sense? Am I with you still?
Yeah, and I guess my question's around, say you're applying for all three. and you've kind of assumed the housing trust fund to be, you know, part of your funding stack for a successful project. Does that, like, in the context of someone reviewing the project overall, does that, you know, like, give preference to that application over someone who's just applying for the housing trust fund? Does that make sense?
Oh, because it has the other two funding sources.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We haven't, no, we haven't talked about that. We haven't talked about a preference or a priority because of that.
Okay.
I think that it would, Montana, I see you. I'm glad you're here. I think that, like, my logic brain goes to, like, if the project was scoring, you know, like the this is really in the weeds, but the CDBG and home have like income requirements and they score based on those. And so let's say like they're within those parameters, they might score better overall because of that. But it's not because they've applied for all three. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. I'm like
So it's not
nodding.
like it's not like a you got all three, but like maybe the mechanics of the other design components of the project make it score higher, but that's a hypothetical. And we actually have not set the scoring criteria yet for the unified app.
Okay.
We're waiting to learn from the scoring from the innovation round and how the Affordable Housing Trust Fund scoring can complement the more rigid nature of the federal scoring that's, you know, more structured with requirements.
I wonder, to Heidi's question, if kind of at the November meeting, when we're able to share more reflections from the innovation round and the scoring and the projects, that might be a good way to start to spend a little time talking about that process to help this committee kind of visualize what that looks like and how the scoring works, and to just kind of set that baseline as you're thinking about the allocation plan. And I also, Emily and I were talking about this today. I think we're going to learn a lot through this innovation round and then the first unified round about, and this gets back to an earlier question of how many projects are we seeing, and do we need the committee's support in connecting partners and building a pipeline of projects to apply? How many are we seeing that do tend to apply for all three, and how many are really targeting just the trust fund? And there's just so much information we don't know yet about how that will work and what the mechanics will be. So I know it'll be a learning process, and I personally I'm eager and nervous and anxious to see about how all of that falls out in the first round.
Me too. Will?
Yeah, I've just been trying to think about your first point here about the vision, because I think I'm just trying to understand what should the allocation plan actually say. Like, so I don't know, Emily, like it seems like you have some ideas about what I'm guessing what I'm getting at is like what's the framework for what like we have the administrative policies, that's like everything. So like the allocation plan seems like it's supposed to be a statement of what the priorities we see for like the next year should be. I'm a little hesitant to get like really prescriptive about that because of what we don't know about who would apply. Like, what if we say, okay, 75% of the money has to go to rental, but then no one applies for rental and like we don't get money out there? But I'm just curious, maybe Emily, if you have thoughts or if others have thoughts, like what, like that's one idea. Like I feel like the allocation plan could be a statement of priorities to be used as guidance. But I'm curious what other people have in terms of ideas of like what the allocation plan should actually say.
Does anyone else want to respond to Will? Well, that's how I think of it too. I think of it as really those kind of high level priorities that you see that are framed from both data and community need. And and I also appreciate and share your caution around being too prescriptive about it. And that leads me to think about like, what are the contingencies, right? So if there are no applicants in rentals, then what is the like language that is in the allocation plan? Like, I think that's a decision point for the committee to say, are you advocating that then the money stays in the trust fund and doesn't get allocated that year, or are you like recommending the staff use their judgment and award to the projects that did apply, right? Like I think those are the decision points that also need to be outlined in the allocation plan, because ultimately it tells, in my mind, the staff and the community how the money can be used. And so those are the pieces to me that like feel really necessary. And I'm interested to hear how others feel, but like I think it's okay to say, I don't know. I agree with you about like maybe percentages might be too granular. Just, and maybe for the first year, right? Like we just learn. But like to say our priorities are rentals, our priorities are X, Y, and Z, and then to see who applies. And then maybe it's also to learn about what community advocacy and outreach the committee can do, or things like that in the open round. And yeah, I don't know, but I think you're right to think about it that way, and also to be cautious about who may not apply and what the barriers may be. Will?
And then like kind of a silly question, but is this meant to be like a 1-page document, or is this meant to be like a 40-page like detailed plan that details all these various scenarios? Like what does it normally look like?
Well, there's no normally. Montana and I were talking this afternoon, and I said, well, I could point them to the consolidated plan, but that's 200 pages. And I don't think that we want to like strive for that. In my mind, it's a couple of pages, honestly. I think it's like your priority, the rationale for that priority, and then some contingencies, right? Maybe I had this idea of putting it in PowerPoint because I think it's accessible to the community and we can do some visual stuff with it. And it's not a report, but it can be a report if you prefer that. But I thought that that might be something to use. One thing to keep in mind is that the structure of the adoption process did change with the review. So you all will recommend the allocation plan to the mayor, and then the mayor will ultimately approve it. So we talked about the structure of the report or the document. Still think it can be a PowerPoint with that as well, but the plan is that we'll make a kind of acknowledgements and signatures page, and that's where the mayor will ultimately sign it, is what we worked out this afternoon. So I think those are some of Will, you're asking the questions that I kind of want to know is like, what product do you all envision? Do you want a report? Do you want a PowerPoint? Like what would be most useful to you? Do you not care? Is it my choice in terms of what I bring? You know, do you care how the content shows up? Like that's all useful feedback to me, because I'm going to spend a lot of time in the next month really digging into how to best facilitate this discussion with you all in November. So any guidance about what would be helpful for you is really what I'm looking for. Katie and then Heidi.
I'm curious, like on your thoughts, what is it easiest? How is it easiest to be formatted in order to share with people outside the committee so that they can also get what they need to in order to know about applications and stuff?
Good question. I think either works. I think that if we keep it relatively short, I think that's the best goal, honestly. The guidelines for the application are pretty lengthy. And so just to be mindful that if they're also reading the allocation plan, if that's something we give them as part of the application materials, it's just an additional document. So just something to be mindful of too. Good question. Heidi?
I was just, I think it would be really useful if you shared the consolidated plan with everyone ahead of time. I know I'm going to have to review it again because I think, in some ways this could, really support projects that are also, in line with the consolidated plan, or it could, support innovative projects that maybe couldn't be funded with HUD and CDBG, and so I think figuring out, where that space is to be like new and innovative is important, like where it's different, I guess. So yeah, I think that would be useful information just to have ahead of time.
Yep. I was planning to follow up after the meeting with the consolidated plan, but the sections I think you should focus on since I don't expect you to read the 200 pages or whatever it is, 150 pages or whatever it is. So yeah, thank you. That's a good suggestion. So we're getting close to time, but I want to propose a process for next month. I'm still a little fuzzy on details of how it'll look, but I'll do more planning before next month, of course. But from building off of what Will said, how does kind of having you all work on doing some brainstorming or work around setting your kind of high level priorities, and then in each priority that you agree to as a committee, then setting your rationale, and then the whether you decide to do it as each priority or as a wholesale kind of the guidance or contingency plan that you would want the staff and ultimately the scoring committee to follow if those projects or those priorities are not applied for. How does that sound as a kind of initial process? Okay. And then for the reserve balance, we could follow a similar process of just sort of kind of what we did for the innovation round of just sharing the budget of what's available currently to be awarded. And then you all could just start to discuss what you would like to allocate to be awarded in the unified application round, and then what you'd like to hold back for the reserve balance process, which is outlined in the policies and procedures. Would that work for you as your process? And then we could write a section on that as well. I'm seeing heads. Okay. All right. And then we'll, I think what I'm hearing is an openness to product and not hearing like it has to be a jazzy PowerPoint, but it could be. So we'll just maybe hold off on deciding the right product until we get closer and then go from there. Does that work? Okay, great. And I'm going to prepare that we're going to spend the bulk of the meeting doing the allocation plan in November. So just a heads up for you all to prepare for that. And it really is, if you can, an important meeting to be in the discussion for. And then we have 7 minutes, so we won't get a deep discussion on this. But just wanted to name, I know I named that we're 5 months in, and I offered that 6 months we would have opportunity for reflection around just kind of the structure of your committee and what you might want to change. And so I think that'll be something we do in November's meeting as well. And thinking about how often you want to meet, projects and work you want to move forward. We will be done with the kind of first kind of key projects, which we're adopting and approving the policies and procedures, and then the allocation plan. And so those are really important and huge bodies of work, but there's lots of other work for you all as a committee to be doing, which are named in your bylaws, and opportunity for you all to kind of think through and cultivate ideas together. So I want to give you space to do that and think about what does the next 6 months of your work together look like, and what do you want to create space for? What community connections? I heard that tonight of like, who do we need to be making relationship with, and who do we need to be, building relationships with in the community? And then the frequency of meetings, is it right to keep meeting monthly, or do you want to change that? And then also just asking if there are other opportunities for you, things that I'm missing for you to reflect on, that you want to add for November's meeting. Anything, or does this work?
I think this looks good.
Okay, well,
I just wanted to, one idea I was thinking about that I think relates to this. So nothing needs to be done for November, but I think we went through like a lot of quantitative data today. I think it'd be really cool to get some qualitative experience from people in the community. I don't know where exactly to go. Like I know Homeward's got like the homeowner and renter education centers. I'm sure like somebody there could come and share some stories. But I also think like, since we've spent some time talking about kind of underrepresented groups, like who could we get to come and talk about like the experience of American Indians in the housing market right now and what that looks like. I just think that'd be a good complement to the numbers that we looked at today. And so maybe that's something we could think about for like December, January, February, something like that. But I remember we talked about that early on. That could be a cool thing that this committee gets to do, is sort of be that forum to hear testimony, so to speak, from people who are engaging in this work on a daily basis.
thanks, Will. All right, we're at the time where you get to share what went well and what can go differently for next time. No, it's your favorite. Nothing? Will and Katie.
I'll go. Sorry, I just feel like I've been talking too much, so I didn't want to be the first. But I liked the vision statement. I was skeptical that we were going to be able to figure that out, but we just got it done. So appreciate it. At my job, we call that debate, decide, commit. Like when you're able to kind of move through something really quickly, and that was a great example of debate, decide, commit. So kudos to everybody.
I like that. I'm writing that down.
I would agree with Will. That was exactly what I was going to say also. I was glad that we could get through that.
Well, if there isn't anything else, I just remembered you didn't approve your minutes from September, and you have a quorum. Do you still have a quorum?
I don't. I actually looked at that, and I think Misty dropped off.
Oh, okay.
We don't have a
All
quorum.
right, we'll have to do October and September's in November, and that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
So does anybody want to call to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
Great. I don't think we have to vote on that, but thanks. And I'll see you in November, and take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks. Have a good night.